All right, what's up? Welcome into the old live show here on a Sunday evening, a little bit later than what I've been doing the last couple of weeks. Appreciate you hanging out with me, and I appreciate the fact that you are all here to watch a top 5% jawline in the state of Kansas conduct a live show tonight. That was the best thing that happened this weekend, the college football weekend. And I know we're going to talk about Cincinnati. Huge weekend for Cincinnati, not just with what happened to them, but what happened to Oregon, who was prime college football playoff competition. We can talk about the Kansas Jayhawks putting together another nice effort, huh? Lance Leipold, right? We can talk about Baylor and Oklahoma State looking very good heading into the final week of the regular season. That is not the best thing that happened this weekend. The best thing that happened this weekend is somebody on Twitter told me that I have a top 5% jawline in the state of Kansas. So you all should be very thankful that you get to watch a YouTube show with such an attractive, handsome young fella here. And that, by the way, seemed to be an Iowa State fan that told me that when I was busy throwing a little more shade at Matt Campbell and company, as Iowa State did lose a fifth game, which is an important thing here because, as I always say, death, taxes, and Matt Campbell losing 5 games in a season. He hit that plateau once again heading into the final weekend of the regular season in college football. But in all seriousness, it was a very interesting weekend of college football. I think it was a very good weekend of college football for the new Big 12, and we're going to start off the show talking about that. Let me hit you with the rundown here. Yes, Rob S. Shout out to Rob S. I see in there saying 5%er. 5%er is correct. That 5% jawline, baby. We are going to talk about the Big 12 being in a position of power here heading into the final weekend of the regular season compared to the ACC, compared to the Pac-12. Hell, compared to the current Big 12. The new Big 12 is in much more a position of power. Is there a debate? Is there going to be some kind of debate about Cincinnati against a 2-loss Bama in the playoff if we get there? I'm seeing enough. I saw tweets right before I came on here of someone saying, like, man, is this really going to be a thing? We're going to talk about 2-loss Bama losing in the conference championship game to Georgia and going up against Cincinnati right when it seems like Cincinnati has finally gotten in there with a big win over SMU and the Oregon loss. We'll see. We'll talk about it. Speaking of that game, Cincinnati, after hearing about no style points, came out and just stuck it to a really good SMU squad, which perfectly coincided with Oregon getting just depleted by Utah. Just depleted. Sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong, because the other big result of the weekend was Ohio State clobbering Michigan State. Now, I think I saw that coming by the time it got there, but I've been kind of wrong on Ohio State, thinking that they were one of these teams really propped up by playing some mediocre Big Ten competition. They clearly have that gear, right? If they're dialed in, they're locked in, they have that gear. That looks like a team that actually could perhaps score some points on the Georgia defense. So, not always right. I might be handsome with this jawline. I'm not always right. I'll admit that to you guys sometimes. There was some right and some wrong, certainly, from this week. All right, let's get it rolling. I see Jeffrey in there. Jeffrey, thank you for the donation. Jeffrey says, okay, I'm here so the show can go on. GD right, Jeffrey. GD right. You are here. The show will go on. Thank you for being here. If you want to be like Jeffrey and donate, you can do so by clicking the $ below the chat box where it says say something, and it'll make sure that your question or comment gets up to the top of the list so that I will see it. It'll get my attention there if you want to make sure that it gets in there, or you just want to support the work that I do. I greatly appreciate all of you guys who do that on a week in, week out basis. So, all right, let's see what we got here. Joe asking, what does John Kurtz look like without glasses? Well, what would be the mystery if I just, showed you that? You'll have to just kind of wonder about that all by your lonesome. David, since he has to be in now until Houston beats them anyway. All right, are we gonna start that? We get a little Houston-Cincy rivalry. That would be kind of fun. Get some Houston-Cincy smack talk going on in here. If we have some Houston and Cincy fans both, I would actually enjoy that quite a bit. New look Big 12 rivalry with both competing now for the AAC championship. Yes, Zach, if KU and K-State both win, Texas finishes dead last. Thank you for the donation, Zach. I did see that. That is something we're going to talk about. Texas losing this week is just not even, they lost to a pretty mediocre West Virginia team, but that's not even like a story at all. Of course they lost to a pretty mediocre West Virginia team. We will get to that. We will cover that. But keep the questions or comments coming. Let's start off with just where this new look Big 12 is right now, because we're here in the final weekend of the college football season, week of the college football season, right? It's rivalry week, the last regular season weekend of college football, in essence, is coming up here. I don't know. What do we have? Army, Navy. I don't know. I get all that stuff mixed up. In earnest, the final weekend of the college football season is coming up here. And on the precipice of this final weekend, we sit here with two Big 12, new Big 12. If we're talking about the new look conference, you have two teams from the new Big 12 that are legitimate college football playoff contenders right now. And you have zero combined from both the ACC and the Pac-12, right? And that, if we go back to where this whole debate started, it was all because of the narrative being shaped by those in the national media about the Big 12 and falling behind the Pac-12 and the ACC and behind all the other power conferences if and when they lost Texas and Oklahoma. And what have we seen this year? Just a perfect result. I mean, it's played out to this point as perfectly as you could have asked for. If you were a fan of somebody from the Irate 8, if you were a fan of one of the four new schools being added to the Big 12, new Big 12, it could not have gone much better, because who saw this year Clemson being as down as they've been? Who saw Clemson going through? Now they're going to get back into the rankings, I would imagine, this week. They were number 26. They just got left out of the AP poll, but Clemson is making a resurgence here, and it's not like they're going to have a terrible season, but by Clemson standards, certainly it has not been good. And it's been them dropping from the ranks of those 4 or 5 untouchable schools that are always going to be there every single year, right? Nobody saw that coming. So that has really made the ACC look particularly vulnerable this year. And I would imagine would have to get ACC leadership at some point wisely on board with expanding to a 12-team playoff, seeing what's happened this year and how very quickly vulnerable that conference can become. Oregon has to be done now. I mean, say what you will about the Ohio State win, and I'm sure the committee, I would imagine that this makes some people really lose some sleep, that they cannot continue to prop up Oregon based on that Ohio State win, considering the amount of love that they have for Ohio State year in, year out, all the time. You can't do anything with Oregon anymore because they got absolutely waxed and absolutely punked by Utah. So now they are out. The Pac-12 is out, and there's not even a remotely close secondary contender from that conference to get into the playoff. So it's Oregon, and then I'm even looking here. You got Utah at 16, which Utah right now does look like the class, honestly, of the Pac-12, the way that they're playing football at the moment. And that's it in terms of ranked teams from the Pac-12. So there's nothing there, no juice. We know about the ACC beyond Clemson. It's been pretty weak, and Wake now has lost a couple of games, and they have kind of turned back into what I think most would have expected them to be like this year, or expected them to have this kind of a drop off when they were ripping off win after win earlier this year. You felt like that was coming eventually and the other shoe would drop. It has. And so now we sit here with Cincinnati, number 4 in the AP poll. But basically right now, I mean, unless the committee is going to come up with something crazy and say Michigan's win over Maryland this weekend was impressive enough to jump them over Cincinnati, there would have to be a lot of pretty creative work by the committee to get somebody into that number 4 spot over Cincinnati this week. So you're looking at Cincinnati likely being the number 4 team in the playoff rankings this week when they come out. And then you've got Oklahoma State sitting around right now at number 7 in the AP poll, just right there. And that's Oklahoma State, by the way, with back-to-back really nice games coming up to help pad their resume, right? Because they're going to play Oklahoma and Bedlam this week. And Oklahoma still is going to deliver some level of cachet, even if they've been a disappointing team for the most part this year. They will deliver some level of cachet. And then they'll play either Oklahoma again or Baylor in the Big 12 championship game. And look, right now, you almost feel like Baylor is the better bet there in terms of like how it would play toward the committee, because they love the Bears, who have stayed at or near the top 10 despite a couple of losses this year. And Baylor had a pretty impressive win in Manhattan over the weekend. I got to see Baylor up close and personal, and even without Gary Bohannon, their starting quarterback, who got knocked out, they handled business and took care in a pretty hostile environment of K-State and got a win. So Oklahoma State has a lot of meat on the bone left here. If they're going to be sitting there and hanging out at like number 7, they have a lot of meat on the bone if anybody loses in front of them. These are 2 legitimate bona fide college football playoff contenders. And this is why that narrative was so frustrating. So frustrating. Because on the field, we know like the Big 12 is going to have teams that can do this and can legitimately compete. And Cincinnati, say what you will about some of the games where they've kind of skated by and just barely gotten by. Well, now into the year, they have not only found a way to win their clunkers, to steal one from the Solid Verbal college football podcast that you guys should all check out. They've been able to win their clunkers, but they're coming around and playing really good football here at the end of the year, beating one of the best teams on their schedule, SMU, to a pulp this weekend. And right at the time where they need some of those style points and more, I would say even more than the style points, because the rankings have kind of worked themselves out here. More so than the style points, it's about just confidence and feeling ready and feeling like you're up to it. And a win like that over a pretty good, maybe I should pause on really good, but a pretty good SMU team, like that's something that can really should and deservedly so pump some confidence into Cincinnati right now that they can do this and they are playoff caliber. So kudos, first of all, to Cincinnati for picking up that win. And second of all, again, reinforces the idea they are a legitimate contender. Oklahoma State has been probably the least talked about team in this top 10. I mean, really, as weird as this will sound, it's like Oklahoma State and Notre Dame right now are the two teams that have just been getting no real serious run and conversation in the playoff debate until just about right now, even though they've been right there kind of on the periphery the entire season. And that's because Notre Dame has never looked sexy with the quarterback situation that they've had. And then they lost the game to Cincinnati relatively early in the season, and everybody just discounted them, wrote them off, and now here they are sitting at number 5 in the AP poll, right behind Cincinnati. So not only is that continuing to prop up Cincinnati's win, which is another thing that's worked out really well for the new look Big 12 this year, but also Notre Dame is sitting there with a chance to potentially be in the playoff if some craziness happens. But they have not been talked about a whole lot. Oklahoma State has not been talked about a whole lot. And I just can't tell you how impressive to me Oklahoma State's win. I know Texas Tech, people will roll their eyes a little bit and say like, oh, I mean, really? That was a fairly mundane game there, John, where they go and knock off Texas Tech over the weekend 23-0. Like, do I really care that much about this game? Sorry, my speakers here going crazy. Why should I really care that much about it? But it was just so like business-like, methodical. That was a Tech team that had been playing really well, and the defense just absolutely squeezed the life out of them, totally sucked the life out of them, shut out Texas Tech. That's a team that is not used in a program, that's not used to being shut out and not scoring points, right? And it's another feather in the cap for Georgia Light. I mean, they are like the Diet Georgia version of that Bulldog defense this year with how good they've been. It's the best Big 12 defense. You know, Max Olson from The Athletic has some statistics that he pointed out where that's the best Big 12 defense that we've seen basically since 2009 Nebraska, which was Ndamukong Suh, who is, you know, one of the most dominant forces we've seen in college football defensively in really the modern era. So what the Cowboys are doing is fairly unprecedented defensively. It has deserved more shine throughout the season, but now they're going to get a chance to really show it on a national stage. Like the playoff race is starting to thin out. We're getting a more concentrated group of contenders up at the top, and the spotlight will be on you with a massive Bedlam game that I think everyone's been looking forward to seeing since Oklahoma and Texas announced that they were leaving for the SEC, and then conference championship week after that, where you would presumably be taking on Baylor or Oklahoma once again, either of which I think would get a pretty considerable amount of fanfare and spotlight. So you've got your chance. Oklahoma State has earned itself a chance to go out and show what they're really, really made of here. And I see David in the chat. Again, if you want to donate, you know what? I'll pause on David for a second because I forgot. Outlaw sent me a donation here. Appreciate the donation, Outlaw of college football. Thank you for the donation. Says, I need to send you one of my famous self-bent Tim McGraw black cowboy hats. I will manage your Ric Flair-esque groupies. I'm not going to do the Ric Flair woo that you tagged on there because I feel like it would not do it justice. But I appreciate that. If you sent me a cowboy hat, I would wear it for, I'll give you like a minute on camera here on the YouTube live. If you sent me a cowboy hat, I would wear it for like a minute, even though that is like not my style at all. Not my style at all. I would do it because I appreciate the support here on the channel. You can always manage the groupies. You can definitely be in charge of the groupies. I will allow you to do that. Nighttime, thank you for the donation. Shout out to Nighttime, always in here. UCF's. That looks like is that the new UCF logo that we have going on there nighttime in your picture? I saw UCF change the way that the logo faces, more like head on right now as they head into the Big 12. But always appreciate you being in the chat, keeping it pretty lively, and thank you for the donation, man. If you want to donate, just hit the $ below the chat box where it says say something, and you can do that. It'll make sure your question or comment gets up to the top of the chat as well. So David says OSU has a much more impressive strength of schedule than Cincinnati. It's not even close. But here's the thing. We have not seen Oklahoma State put up a top shelf, like top level win like what Cincinnati has right now. And again, a lot of this is about combining a number of different factors. If we're combining undefeated versus one loss, if we're taking best win that's out there and what Cincinnati put together by going and winning in South Bend, that's another feather in the cap that they have. And even if you just extrapolate it back to last year and the season that they had last year, which I think matters even more with a team like Cincinnati that has to fight and scrap for whatever it can instead of playing a Power 5 schedule every year, I still think Cincinnati, deservedly so, is in the position that they're in over Oklahoma State. Now, if you ask me who wins that game if they play on a neutral field, boy, that's a game I would love to see. It's a game I would really love to see. But I would favor Cincinnati in that game. I would, and it's nothing against the Cowboys. I think they're both really good teams. But I think Cincinnati, especially the Cincinnati team that played this weekend against SMU, that's a really good team. And that's a team that could go out there and I think give Oklahoma State's defense at least a really legitimate challenge, as opposed to what most of the Big 12 has been able to do, which is not much against the Cowboy defense. And frankly, if I'm Oklahoma, the way Oklahoma's offense has been playing here lately, thinking about going up against Oklahoma State here at the end of the year, boy, in Stillwater, I don't like any part of that. I don't like any part of that at all. Yeah, David points out one touchdown in 19 quarters. One touchdown in 19 quarters allowed by the Oklahoma State defense. That's insane. That is insane. So all the respect in the world for what the Cowboys have done. I just have a ton of respect as well for Cincinnati. And I think for Cincinnati, some of this has to be right. Looking back on it, saying like, can we give Cincy some of the same credit and benefit of the doubt that's being extended to Alabama? Because Bama, you look at them this week. I mean, they were in a really close game. Arkansas, middle of the fourth quarter, has the ball down by one possession with a chance to go score and tie the game. Alabama's done that with Florida, with LSU, both of whom have now fired their coaches for having just terrible seasons. And Alabama, it's always like, well, look, we know that they have that high gear because they're Bama and the recruits and the stars. And, if you put them in the playoff right now, they'd be fine. They could go compete with Georgia. They get that benefit of the doubt. And I realize that they've earned it because they're Alabama and they've won all these titles under Saban and all of that. But there's also this element here where I think, and I've heard this storyline kind of talked about, like, oh, well, Bama gets bored. They're winning all these games. They play the same teams over and over again in the league, and they're always beating them. And so that, well, Cincinnati is the same way. It's on a different scale, but it's the same type of thing. I mean, can we not cut Cincinnati a little bit of slack for sleepwalking through a couple of games in a season where they're massive favorites every week? They're playing these same teams that they're used to playing all the time. They know that they can beat them because they beat everybody last year. I think Cincinnati deserves some of the same benefit of the doubt that we give to Alabama, but yet we unquestionably give it to Bama in spades because of Saban and everything that they have done. And again, I think you have to be willing to do a little bit of that, but we go over the top with it. And that's the storyline that still sticks out to me. Whereas like Ohio State has clearly proven their top gear is definitely playoff worthy. And any doubts about them, doubts about the Oregon loss, like that, their resume at this point is fine. And obviously it was always going to be, if they won out, if they beat Michigan, they win the Big 10 title, they were going to be in the playoffs. So they don't really have anything to worry about right now. They certainly don't need my validation, but they now have really, really validated a lot of that. So benefit of the doubt that always gets extended to them, I think is earned this year. Now they have earned that certainly based on what they've put together so far this year. I don't know that Bama has. And that's what annoys me about the way Cincinnati is treated versus the way Alabama is treated. Here is a donation from Mike. Mike, I appreciate the donation. No message there, but Mike just chipping in. If you want to do so like Mike, you can click the $ below where it says say something, the $ below the chat box there. I saw somebody get in a K-State shot. Let me see. Who was that up here in the chat? Saw LOL Kansas State from somebody in there. I'd imagine it was Let's Go Brandon. Let's Go Brandon. I imagine probably a Baylor fan. Hey, touche, man. I got nothing to say. No real comeback there. Baylor outplayed K-State. Absolutely outplayed K-State. They were a very good team. That defense, speaking of good defenses, that defense had the Cats really, really locked up this weekend. Couldn't do much at all. Spoiled Skylar Thompson's senior day, and Baylor having to play a backup quarterback who played admirably well as a freshman coming into the game for Gary Bohannon. Baylor took care of business. Shout out to the Bears. Nothing to say there. Nothing to say there. I see Glenn. Let's hear some love for BYU. BYU. I'll be honest. Like, I know they were playing Georgia State. I assumed that they won. I'm gonna go. We're all gonna discover the score here on our own, and I'm sure there are BYU fans in the chat. 34-17. 34-17. So okay, solid, taking care of business. Didn't cover, but that's all right. Just needed the win. BYU now 9-2. I feel like another team that's put together a pretty quiet season. I was talking about like Oklahoma State and Notre Dame, fairly quiet relative to the rest of the college football playoff race. BYU, it's been kind of the same way. They had the midseason lull with the Boise State and Baylor games, but really nice year, especially after losing Zach Wilson from last season. And I've talked plenty about just the overall strength of the league and the strength of how the new look Big 12 is looking this year. And BYU has contributed to that by being in the top 15 to top 20 the entire year. So every time you bring up those like aggregate rankings of where the conferences are at, BYU is pulling a lot of weight and helping out. So shout out to the Cougars, man. Shout out to the Cougars. I'd be curious what the bowl prospects are for BYU, and BYU fans, get at me in the chat there with what you think is going to happen there and what possibilities are still out there on the table. Would be nice if BYU could get as much spotlight as possible in a nice bowl game to go out there and put together a nice win for the league. Now, I can go ahead and tell you guys here that I'm not somebody that puts a ton of stock into bowl games, and I don't, frankly, I'm just I appreciate the football that's on constantly during bowl season, but I don't get overly excited about bowl results or anything. I think it's too hard. It's getting harder and harder even to gauge like meaning from bowl games with guys sitting out and all that. But whatever, the Big 12 can use any bit of PR help that they can get. And it's not because they really, to kind of put a cap on like why I started down this road in the first place, it's not because they really need it based on what's happening on the field. That should take care of itself, especially this year right now. That resume should take care of itself. But we know that there are perception problems. We know that that's not going away. It's been here for a long time. It's going to continue to be here. So anything that BYU can do in bowl season to help that out would certainly be a welcome addition to the league. And man, I mean, I had this thought and heard somebody else echo this over the weekend, but you think about the 3 teams that are being added to the league, or the 4 teams, I'm sorry, that are being added to the league. 3 of the 4 are having tremendous seasons. Cincinnati, very obvious, may well make the playoff. I mean, right now, I would say in line, like as a legitimate favorite to make the college football playoff. Then you have BYU, which has been in the top 15 all year. Then you have Houston, which is is it 10 straight now? 10 straight for Houston, and is going to play in the conference championship game against Cincinnati. So wonderful season for Houston and Dana Holgorsen getting things turned around after that loss to Texas Tech to open the year. And then UCF, the thought that I had was like, man, if Dylan Gabriel doesn't get hurt, if UCF has a little better injury luck this year, like you could be looking at all 4 of these teams in the top 25. I just know UCF has been dealt a pretty tough hand this year. So we were like that close to having that kind of an entrance, so to speak, for these teams in their first year since announcing that they're joining the Big 12. So the way that this season has played out, it's hard to argue that it's not been an overwhelming success for the Big 12 based on both what has happened with the league, where the league is at right now when the entire spotlight is on the playoff and the playoff race, and what has happened to the other leagues that were perceived to be in front of the Big 12. Because I have no problem admitting that the SEC and the Big 10 are always going to reign supreme, at least for the foreseeable future, certainly with the way the financials are going to get distributed here over the next 10 to 20 years, it looks like there's no chance of that gap really improving much for everybody else. They're going to be ahead. But the other three are very even. That's been the point from the beginning. And the fact that people couldn't come around to that, or that maybe there are still those out there that think it will still change and the Big 12 will fall behind, I think that is just such a ridiculous asinine point. And I thank Oklahoma State and Cincinnati and BYU, for that matter, too, for proving that wrong by all being within the top 15 right now, and Cincinnati on the verge of actually being in said college football playoff. MJB Set 93, appreciate the donation. Thank you, MJB Set 93. If the Big 12 is a weak conference, what conference is strong? Big 10, okay, and the SEC has 4 quality teams out of 14. Rank the conferences. Yeah, I am always going to be one that I prefer the SEC to the Big 10. I do still think, look, Georgia is the dominant force. That's going to score you a lot of points there. Alabama is, to me, a legitimate top 5 team. Top 5 team for sure. I just don't know that they deserve benefit of the doubt that they should just be 2 or 3 automatically here. But they are a top 5 team. And then beyond that, I know that things can get a little more spotty, and the Big 10 probably has better depth, quality depth up at the top there would really be the argument that I would make. But I always just appreciate the general quality of the depth in the SEC more so than the Big 10. I just think there is more crap, for lack of a better term, in the Big 10. Ole Miss, I can't forget Ole Miss. I think pretty highly of Ole Miss. Texas A&M, I see them hanging out there at 14. I'm not the biggest A&M fan. Great win over Bama, but I think that's a somewhat pedestrian team there. But we saw Michigan State get exposed. I still feel like Michigan will get undressed pretty good by Ohio State, but they've been a solid team. I have to admit they've pulled off more than I thought they would this year. But Wisconsin, I don't know. I've just seen too much bad football out of them this year. Iowa, I do not think Iowa is a very good team. I think if you put Iowa through an SEC schedule, things would not go very well. So I would rank the SEC number 1. I would rank the Big 10 number 2. But then, it's very clear, just glaringly obvious that the Big 12 is number 3, far ahead of the Pac-12 and far ahead of the ACC this year. So because, we're talking right now, I'm talking current Big 12. You still do have Oklahoma. You're basically swapping out Oklahoma for Cincinnati, which is actually a loss, which underscores this whole point. That's an L for the current Big 12, that they're not getting to count Cincinnati and they have to take Oklahoma instead. That is an L. But, just seeing a donation that came in here. 1 second. But the Big 12 clearly has been the third best conference. If we're talking 4 or 5, I think you have to go Pac-12 just because of Oregon, to me, because at least they were a part of the college football playoff conversation legitimately for a good chunk of the season. The ACC just has not had that. And I think when they lose Clemson, you see very quickly how shallow and hollow the rest of the conference actually is. I was never a very big Wake believer, even though, as someone has correctly pointed out in this chat before, I should be somebody who rides for a team like Wake that is smaller and overlooked. And that is true. And perhaps I should have embraced them more, but I just never thought that it was real enough for them to be an actual contender here. So that's how I would rank those conferences, but I appreciate the donation. And man, I appreciate this donation big time from Dawn. Way too kind and generous, but really thank you for that, Dawn. Says, normally I can't make these live. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Dawn. Glad you were able to catch it live today. I'm glad that the later time slot here worked out for you. Man, thank you. You guys are way too kind. Way, way, way too kind. And I look forward to these. Definitely highlights of the week. And I want to keep this going as much as I can during the off season. So again, I've had a couple people reach out to me with ideas of how to keep content going during the off season. Hit me up on Twitter at JL Kurtz. That's probably the easiest way to make sure that I see it. You can hit me with a DM on Twitter. Give me some ideas on what you guys want to see content wise, and we'll do some more brainstorming as far as that goes. But hopefully we'll keep that coming for you, Don. And I can see that you're a K-State fan, Don. I'll hopefully have something to announce here before too long, but I'm going to find more ways to give you K-State content during basketball season as well. Okay. Colby, I see Colby in there. So glad I caught this live. I'm with the Wildcat 91.9 and I love your content. Keep it up. Hey, man, Wildcat 91.9, K-State Student Radio. That's how I got my start. Sports director back in 2009. I think it was 2009 because we went to UCLA. I got to broadcast the game at the Rose Bowl, and I believe that was the year that I was the sports director there at the station. Night U. Hi, John. UCF is 7-4 thus far, and when they beat UCF next weekend, they'll end the regular season 8-4 in Malzahn's first year. Yeah, so there you go. That's back to that point where I think, if UCF has a little better injury luck, you don't lose your quarterback, you don't lose Dylan Gabriel, you could have another win or two there, and all of a sudden this season would have UCF in the top 25, and you'd have all four of the new additions ranked. Yeah, all things considered, based on what UCF has gone through this year, I think that's more than fine for Gus Malzahn, and you'd have to feel pretty good about what's going on there. Maybe feeling even better based on the way Brian Harson's season has ended here for Auburn, with them continuing to take some bad losses as well. So shout out to Gus Malzahn. Nighttime says, yeah, UCF has had some bad luck. Optimistic though. Yeah, it seems like you guys should be in a decent spot. I would not be too overly worried about this year. So if you want to donate like everybody else here, you can hit the $ below the chat box where it says say something. Very much appreciate everybody that's done that already this year. So Big 12 looking great right now. New look Big 12 looking great. At some point, I probably need to circle back around to Stuart Mandel. How about that for an offseason interview? Stuart Mandel, get him back on, readdress some of the talking points that were going around about the league at the beginning of the year, see if anything has changed, if any perspective has changed based on solely this season, which I would be very curious to know what the opinion is there. Because, I get that you can't change just a big picture narrative based on a small sample size of just one season. But the problem is it's not just the one season, because if we're talking about the Pac-12 specifically, that's been going down since 2016, the last time they had somebody actually in the playoff. It's been a mess for a while now. This year has just been in line with that. And they have been surpassed by Cincinnati up at the top. They have been surpassed by Oklahoma State now up at the top of this league. Every week that Jeffrey Fuller puts out those composite computer rankings, we see that the Big 12 is far ahead of the Pac-12. It's not even been close this year. So it's even if this year were to be an outlier, it's been a pretty emphatic outlier where the Big 12 now has two contenders here at the end of the year as opposed to zero combined for the ACC and the Pac-12. And the rankings have not even been close. Most of the year, the Pac-12 has been closer to the Mountain West in terms of average team rank in the computers than where the Big 12 is at. So all of that stuff together would tell you, or at least tells me, and I would think it should tell you, that this does mean something. This is a pretty statistically significant year for the Big 12. But again, the overall narrative was just that they're going to be competitive. They're going to be competitive with these other leagues as everything moves forward. So let's talk a little bit about the games that happened here. Oregon got absolutely destroyed by Utah. And I wish I could remember the guy's name. I would playfully call out the Oregon fan who was in here midweek last week, going back and forth with me. And we did go back and forth some about I'm just trying to fuel my narrative with the Oregon hates. And I haven't actually watched the games here lately with Oregon and that they have been playing better, even though I said I watched a lot of the Washington game and I watched a little bit of the Washington State game. And I was very impressed. Very impressed at least by the Washington State game, not the Washington game. But even with being impressed by the Wazoo performance, I knew that there was still a lot left to be desired for what Oregon has been doing much of the season. Utah was really tough. That's the type of game that they seem to win. Utah made a quarterback change in the middle of the season. They're now a different team with said new quarterback. Felt pretty strongly that was going to be an Oregon loss, and boy, was it. I mean, that was 28-0. They're down at Utah, 28-0. And Utah dominated every single facet of that game. Proved the point on Oregon here. They've had the opposite trajectory as Ohio State, where Oregon was playing great at the beginning of the year, and they have started to slide back, and some of the limitations, particularly at quarterback, have been exposed. Ohio State, on the other side, rough start to the year. They got it really rolling with C.J. Stroud. They made changes on their defense, and now, bam, here they are rolling at the end of the year. So as much as I want to totally gloat about that, I am thrilled that it happened for Cincinnati's sake. But as much as I want to just come totally gloat about that, I can't totally gloat about that because at the same time, my Ohio State point where I felt like they were getting way too much benefit of the doubt actually in turn looks fairly foolish right now because people were right. Now, I would still tell you that there is too much benefit of the doubt granted at those snapshots in time based on resumes at that point in time to teams like Ohio State. And Ohio State to me leads the pack on that front. But the, in the end, that was correct. Ohio State is a team that has that championship caliber gear. Mike, appreciate the donation. Mike, no message there, but Mike chipping in once again. And Tony, man, Tony with it's another massive donation here tonight. You guys are killing it, and I can't thank you enough for that. Thank you so much, Tony. No message there. I just see I like the little sticker that's going along there with a guy riding a rocket ship. That's where we're going tonight, man, to the moon. We're going to the moon tonight with this thing. I've got about 10, 15 more minutes that I can do. I'm going to have to cut it off just a little bit shorter than I typically would tonight because of a prior engagement. But keep the questions and comments coming. And if you want to donate, make sure your question or comment gets up to the top. You can donate by clicking the $sign below the chat box where it says say something. Let's see. I see a Baylor fan in here talking about Baylor, K-State, Baylor's backup quarterback. Yeah, Baylor's backup quarterback, Blake Sharpen, was incredibly impressive. 19 of 24, 162 yards in the game against K-State. I say incredibly impressive, like pretty darn impressive. Like definitely for being thrown in there after having not played this year. That was very encouraging. Now, I have not seen an injury update on Bohannon. I don't if there's a Baylor fan in there who has seen any kind of update on Bohannon, I would be very curious about that heading into the final weekend here where the Big 12 title race still has to shake out. Baylor's got Tech at 11 o'clock. That's right, Tech. They still haven't played Tech yet there. That's a game I would feel Baylor is going to be pretty motivated for, knowing what is still on the line potentially for them there. I know someone asked me my thoughts on Baylor Tech earlier. I would not predict Tech to win that game. I would not. I'm sorry, Tech fans. I think Baylor impressed the heck out of me with the way they handled business in Manhattan. I think they're going to be all right. I see Scott says possibly out to the bowl game. Well, look, Blake Sharpen, if he plays the way that he did in Manhattan, Baylor is perfectly capable of winning that game against Texas Tech. And now, Big 12 championship game, that's going to be a different story. If you're having to go up against Oklahoma State's defense in a hypothetical Big 12 title game here, now we're talking about something different for Baylor fans, even though I was very impressed with Sharpen. We're talking about something different there if it's going to be Big 12 title game. But Texas Tech next week, I think you'd be all right there. I think you'd be all right. Colby, appreciate the donation, Colby. Colby, thoughts on the officiating last night? You probably covered it, but I didn't get to hear your thoughts. Yeah, K-State Baylor, I was not real thrilled with some of the officiating in the first half. There, in particular, a two-play stretch. K-State's offense, which was struggling mightily. There was a deep ball, one shot down the sideline that Skylar Thompson actually took, where for much of the game he was just so vexed he did not throw the ball downfield much. But he took a shot. It looked like Baylor got away with a hold/PI. And then after that, K-State punts. Baylor muffs the punt. K-State recovers, but they called interfering with the catch, which I realize that the rule does not have to mean contact there, that you could have just been interfering with the catch. Total judgment call. And I know some people told me it was a Dean Blandino who was the I'm sorry. Shapen. I keep saying Sharpen for the quarterback. Yes, thank you for correcting me there. Shapen. Anyway, I digress. On the officiating point, they called the interfering with the punt. That was the thing I really had an issue with. I did not think he interfered with the catch. I know Blandino, whoever the rules expert was, apparently said that was the right call. I didn't see it that way. Granted, I did not see it 100 different times on TV. I just saw the replays that were being shown at the stadium. So that's probably not totally fair for me to judge based on that. But I did not agree with that at the time. I don't think it's the reason K-State lost the game or anything like that. I don't at all. I think Baylor was the better team. I mean, Chris Kleiman said it in his postgame press conference that K-State played with a ton of effort and really battled, and it was. I've seen a couple of people saying here like that it was a war, and I think that's what it was. It was a really physical game. Two defenses that played really, really high level football. I thought for most of the game, it was a war, but Baylor was better. They were the better team, so I wouldn't blame it on officiating, even if I didn't agree with some of that. I think like the bigger thing, if you're a K-State fan and you really want to lament something, it's Phillip Brooks muffing a punt early in the game. You get a 3 and out, you get to stop early, immediately muff the punt, and then give up a touchdown to Baylor. That was disheartening. It kind of flattened out some of the energy in the stadium, which was pretty palpable at that point in time. I thought that was just a really crucial play. And then you're just playing from behind the whole game when the offense really never got in gear. I think it's different mentally if it's 0-0 for a lot of that first quarter and first half, and you're still within a possession later on in the game, then like coming down the home stretch of the game. That could have made things a lot different. And lamenting not giving the rock to Deuce. Deuce Vaughn only had 11 carries, even though he was averaging double-digit yards per carry. Yes, probably should have given him the ball more. Definitely a lot of blame to go around. But in the end, I think it was just like Baylor is a better team. They are a better team. I know this is not K-State. You're not all here for just K-State. But I think a part of the issue here is like K-State right now is just it's a program good enough to get your hopes up, and it's a program good enough to be slightly above average. But that's kind of where the ceiling is right now, where it's hitting. Maybe I shouldn't use the term ceiling. There's probably a higher ceiling there if Kleiman can start recruiting a little better. But right now, clearly they keep bumping into that, where the Kleiman era, it's been like close where you think they may jump up to like 9 or 10. And then year one, it was 8-4. This year, if they can go win at Texas on Black Friday, it's going to be 8-4. They're close, but they're not winning a lot of these games against teams that are in the upper portion of the conference. So that's kind of a state of the union address for where I think K-State football is at right now. Shorts all year. That's a pretty good name there. Happy Thanksgiving and a donation. Happy Thanksgiving to you too, Shorts all year. And appreciate that donation. Shorts all year could have been my motto when I was a kid growing up. Always wanted to wear basketball shorts all the time. Now I'm too much of a wimp. I am very cold all the time. A couple other topics I want to hit here. I've got, 9:12. I'm going to give you about 8 more minutes here. 8 more minutes. So if you want to make sure your question or comment gets up to the top, you can donate by clicking the $ below the chat box there. Man, we have not talked really much about Texas, have we? We have not talked about Texas. So Texas loses to West Virginia, which was in no way surprising. That to me was like one of the easier games. Texas, for a while there, I did not have much of a read or a very good read on Texas, but it became much easier as the season rolled along. That was not a difficult game to predict. Like Texas, when the season's already off the rails, late in the year, traveling on the road, long road trip, and they're going to Morgantown to play West Virginia. Like, yes, of course West Virginia won that game. And Texas now has some major quarterback issues where both guys might be hurt. They don't really know who's going to play quarterback. K-State doesn't really know who's going to play quarterback because Skylar Thompson got hurt. He was, after the game, seen on crutches with an air cast. So it's not looking great that he'll be able to turn around and play in 6 days on Friday. So there's that game may be a little bit of a bleep show on offense because nobody knows who's going to play quarterback. But Texas is sitting here now, beaten down both literally and physically here at the end of the year, not going bowling and playing a game that ultimately for them is pretty meaningless against K-State at the end of the year. It's a sad state of affairs. And you guys saw, if you follow me on Twitter, some screenshots from that story that came out late in the week. It was like Thursday, maybe, that just makes it seem like it's even more of a mess at Texas than we thought. This came from Brian Jones, who's a former Texas player who was talking on 104.9 The Horn, the flagship radio station for Texas. Said he knows of 5 to 6 heavy-handed donors who are pressuring Steve Sarkisian to play certain players based on their race. He said that Alabama coach Nick Saban warned Sark about taking the UT job and said, it's just a shame, man. I thought we were all in this to win. There's no way you're going to win when you're asking or trying to dictate who your head coach plays. And in some instances, crossing color lines is definitely unfortunate. You know, I mean, we could sit here all day and be like, how legit is this? How much validity is there to that? How much should we trust that? But the bottom line is it's just every week there's some kind of off the field storyline, whether it's the monkey, whether it's this, whether it's Eyes of Texas controversy, like weird guy asking like most bizarro question at a Texas press conference ever. The Horns Digest, Horns Illustrated. I don't remember that guy was that asked a super weird question to Steve Sarkisian. It's just like, it's a circus. It just has this, it all adds to this circus feel around the Texas football program right now. Chris Del Conte came out and gave the vote of confidence to Sark. We talked about that this week. I think they have to, but it is a total and complete mess and circus right now. And I think whether or not the specific allegations there are true of 5 to 6 donors trying to dictate who's playing based on race or all that, I don't even mean to get down like an emotionally charged element of that story, but you get the feel that like donors, it's not a secret that donors have had too much influence in the program. And that's a large part of why Texas has gotten here. And that's why I always say Texas has just sort of reached this point where the problems are so much bigger and deeper than just the head coach. And you can be frustrated about Tom Herman's ceiling, that even with the senior Sam Ehlinger and veteran roster and these recruiting classes coming up, they could only go 7-3, and that was the ceiling and the peak, and 10-3 in the Sugar Bowl. Like, that was the best that was ever going to happen. You can say what you want about that. You can say what you want about Sark and the cover being bare and not figuring out. Until Texas figures out some of that and fixes some of that and the meddling going on up at the top and just the mess that it is up at the top of the, until you fix that, you're just going to be doing a lot of expensive rearranging below at a level that's not going to make enough of a difference. And I think that's the thing that Texas needs to look themselves in the mirror and realize, and take a little bit of a piece of humble pie like Kansas did, and what they finally did with getting rid of Jeff Long, bringing in Travis Goff as the AD, and making that hire of Lance Leipold, who right now looks really, really good. They beat Texas. They hung with Oklahoma for 3/4 of that game. And then they hung with TCU until the very bitter end on Saturday, which I know TCU is not a great team, but we're talking about Kansas, man. This is a team that has just not even competed with teams. They now very much look like just an average bad team. They still have a long way to go, don't get me wrong, but like Kansas finally accepted that they needed to start to be a little more humble in the way they handled this, and it's worked. And Texas is going to need to do the same thing, but I think they are too far gone down that road right now. I don't know if this is going to get fixed with Sark, but that's been the cherry on top, obviously, for Big 12 fans here. New look Big 12 has done well. Cincinnati's done well. Notre Dame keeps winning to inflate that victory. Oklahoma State has turned itself into a legitimate playoff contender heading into the last week of the regular season. And then on top of that, Texas has been an absolute dumpster fire. Just an absolute dumpster fire. And all it takes on Saturday for Texas to finish last in the Big 12, and the poetry of Texas finishing last in the Big 12 the year that they decide to go leave, and you had things like, I'm going to have to go find that screenshot, the Texas like SB Nation site writing the headline about, all these schools in the Big 12 thought it was so great riding Texas's coattails, subsidizing the conference, and now here we go, and they're all going to cry. The poetry of Texas turning around, finishing last in the Big 12 and losing to Kansas would just be giving you another chef's kiss here. All it takes is for K-State to beat Texas, right? 7-4 K-State to beat Texas, and for Kansas to beat West Virginia. Now, that part will obviously be much tougher, but how motivated will West Virginia be? They are 5-6, so they're playing for bowl eligibility at Kansas, but Kansas is at home taking on West Virginia, having just played TCU close, having just beaten Texas, and then a couple weeks before that, hanging with Oklahoma. It's not out of the realm of possibility here, folks, that we could have a Texas last place finish. We could have a Texas last place finish in the Big 12 this year, right after announcing that they're bolting for the SEC. And that would just be wonderful. And I feel like that is a good place to stop here, because I do have to get out because of time constraints a little bit early here tonight. About the only other thing I had written down that I didn't get to was the Texas Tech radio crew. Texas Tech radio crew, they had some shirts made up that had the bad boys of radio on there, which I think may have been a Rob Bro creation, who does a great job covering Texas Tech and doing radio in Lubbock. I think that may have been a Rob Bro creation, but I enjoyed that. And then there was another one that was like in the shape of a parental advisory sticker that said something about him too. So they clearly were enjoying the suspension life. And Texas Tech, like, kind of halfway recognized them, right, over the Jumbotron / speakers during a timeout in the game too. So it seemed like everybody there in Lubbock was really embracing that. Thank you for the donation, Tommy. Right in before the gun. Tommy says West Virginia needs to take one for the team. Well, I'm not going to be the one to say it because I understand West Virginia fans, you don't want to lose to Kansas. I'm not going to tell any team out there like, hey, man, just lose to Kansas. It's still memeable enough right now that you don't want to do it, even though I think by the time we hit next year, it's probably not going to be as memeable as it is right now. But I would not cry about it in that it would make Texas finish last in the Big 12. Would not cry about it. Some complex feelings here because I don't need the Kansas program getting too uppity and too much better too fast, even though I think like cat's out of the bag on that. They are going to improve quite a bit under Lance Leipold. I think that much is very clear. But I would definitely revel in. I would take some enjoyment in that. And we would make some of that pretty fun if that happened to the Mountaineers. All right, nighttime. Everybody that's been in here, I appreciate the kind words. I appreciate all the donations. You guys were more than generous tonight. Thank you so much for that. I think Wednesday is going to have to be the next live show. K-State's playing basketball Monday and Tuesday. A couple of bigger games. They've got Arkansas, and then it'll be Cincinnati or Illinois. Maybe going to the games. They're at Sprint Center in Kansas City. So things will be a little bit different with that holiday week. I think I'll still be able to squeeze in a live show probably earlier in the night on Wednesday because then I've got a K-State football pregame show to record after that. Point being, schedule's tight this week, but I should be able to work in a live show for you on Wednesday and just keep it rolling from there. So thank you. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. I see the Thanksgiving wishes in there. Happy Thanksgiving. I should be able to talk to you once again before then, but enjoy the holiday season. Enjoy a short work week, hopefully for everybody here, and I will talk to you guys soon.